I'm Gary Acosta, co-founder and CEO of NAHREP, and I'm here this beautiful morning in Miami with my good friend Leo Pareja. Good to see you.
Likewise, brother.
So things have been quiet lately. What have you been up to?
Not much.
Anything new?
My
Yeah. So tell us, what's the latest?
As of this month, I'm named the CEO of eXp Realty.
Largest real estate firm in the United States.
It's actually the single largest brokerage on the planet.
Wow.
By agent count and transaction count, but in the U.S. as well. So we sell more homes than any other company, and we have more agents than anybody else.
And that's an important distinction that we were just talking about. So you differ from the Century 21s and the KWs of the world in the sense that you are a single brokerage.
Exactly. We are the single largest monolithic real estate company. So corporate owned, all of the agents are ours, no franchises.
It's interesting because, I'm just going to digress for a second on this subject about just the kind of business model that you guys have deployed. I remember having a conversation with some friends that worked at another large real estate company about what I thought would be trends moving forward, the type of companies that would thrive. And there was a handful of things that I sort of suggested, and it wasn't just me, there was a group of us that was kind of a brain trust of sorts. And one was, I thought the team phenomenon was not going to go away. It was only going to proliferate. I thought that a single real estate platform made more sense because I thought just the risk and the swings of running a local brokerage is pretty tough, and you want to keep costs to a minimum, I would think. And I also thought about the limitations that a lot of real estate firms have in being in just a single market. And giving them the capacity to recruit and build teams across state lines was also something that really didn't exist way back then. I don't know, it was 10, 12 years ago. And then along comes eXp that has this very unique business model. Tell us a little bit about that business model itself that differentiates it from the others.
So I'll give you how I describe the company in one sentence, which is we're a platform that allows real estate entrepreneurs to build whatever size dream they want. So that's my 2-second elevator pitch, but we are a fully virtual platform operating in all 50 states, 22 other countries. US and Canada is how we think of North America, with 22 countries outside of that. But it's completely virtual, single cap for the agent, and they can sell properties across state lines. So if you remember my background, I was multi-state, multi-market, and that was actually my biggest frustration because during the financial crisis and I was servicing banks, they would have me go, 3 hours north, 4 hours south, and I'd end up having to pay multiple franchises an additional fee just to operate. I'm licensed in one state, but I was having to pay 4 or 5 different franchisees inside of that state because there were these made-up lines that had nothing to do with me, and it was quite frustrating and expensive.
And there was a lot of things that were sort of happening at the same time from a technology standpoint, social media, the emergence of the internet, platforms like NAHREP being created that had these sort of large networks of agents that could be, tapped into potentially. I think all of those things kind of played into just the transitions that we've seen in the marketplace and how you guys have really taken advantage of that in a big way. So kudos to you guys. I know you weren't there for the beginning. In fact, most people may not know, or some people may not know, that you and I actually go way back. And I remember when you were that young, upstart, sort of very ambitious, aggressive agent in the DC area, and it was we met during the housing crisis, and you were doing a lot of REO business, and I had an REO asset management platform, and I think that's where we first connected. And then a mutual friend of ours, Juan Martinez, sort of said, no, you can't just do that. You got to be part of NAHREP.
Well, until this day, I always remind people, he called me and said, hey, it'll take 2 hours a week and won't take too much time. But I need you to start the NAHREP chapter in DC.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And it was a little bit more than 2 hours a week, and it became a pretty big part of my life.
And not to get too personal, but how old were you then?
I was in my 20s. I was probably like 27, 28.
27, 28. And you were at the time, because I remember this, you invited me, or somebody invited me to a KW, they call it the family reunion, their big conference. And they honored you because you were the #1 real estate agent in their network in the world.
Yeah, in transaction
At
size.
28?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
What the hell? How'd you do that?
Well, I started at 19, right? So I attribute a good portion of my career to right place at right time. I feel lucky that I found this industry I fell in love with in college. I went to college to actually do tech. I don't know if you remember that. So
I think I do, yeah.
I wanted to do websites and go into software, and then the tech bubble blew up in the year 2000.
Yep.
And I found real estate, got obsessed, and kind of made that my life's passion. But I went the team route, and I've been saying on cameras for 10 years that I saw the rise of the super team becoming the dominant business model. And at EXP, we have some of the most productive teams in the country, right? So we just announced our top 250 teams, which there's some NAHREP members in there. But our top 250 teams combined sold over 69,000 homes.
Wow.
If just my top 250 teams were an independent brokerage, they'd be the 6th largest brokerage in the United States.
Is
that right? Yeah.
Wow.
So I think companies or organizations like NAHREP are just collections of people. I think people join people. And so I think the value proposition is you get to be in relationship and in community with the people that you want to learn from. And it's a very entrepreneurial and very aspirational business, the one we're in. So, you get to be around the people you want to emulate, and the model that we built doesn't have these lines that are artificial. And so I feel like I see more collaboration here than I've seen in any other organization I've been a part of.
That's cool. That's great. Going back a little bit and talking about our relationship and the genesis of that. So I had two, sort of parallel relationships with you. One from a business standpoint, and then secondly with NAHREP. And like you said, you started the chapter in the DC area. Thank you very much, because it's now one of the best chapters we have in the country. So that's cool. And then we recruited you to the national board. And one of the things that you said that I always wanted to accomplish, and people like Juan Martinez always wanted us to accomplish, is, organized real estate isn't necessarily the sexiest thing in the world, right? There are certain agents, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to anyone, but sort of gravitate to organized real estate, and they're not necessarily the movers and shakers in the real estate market. And we wanted to be an organization that attracted the best and the brightest, as I described it. And that's not easy, because successful people are busy, successful people are focused, and to get them to sort of start to spend time and to contribute with NAHREP was a challenge. And I remember we had this sort of mastermind session, and the outcome of that session was to create the NAHREP Top 250 list, where we started to rank the top Latino realtors and eventually even mortgage originators in the country, providing them with recognition. I thought that process sort of changed the way people saw NAHREP, and having people like you, the #1 KW agent in the world, on the national board, was important for us to really validate that perception, and really to sort of drive the organization in a different way that we thought was really healthy and cool. And then, your own sort of leadership and your own personal ambition, you started to stand out within the board, and in a very short period of time, you were elected the national president. So what was that like for you, a young guy being the national president of this organized real estate platform that was growing, and I thought was really sort of, something new, something fresh?
I'll go back to where you started, and I'll give you credit, because I feel like I've been in some form of advocacy my whole life as a Latino. But where you nailed it perfectly is you made NAHREP about economic empowerment, right? I took your words and made them my own, where, when I get in front of folks, when we talk about the Latino buying power, it's not about, hey, we deserve a seat at the table. It's if in 10 years you do not have a strategy, you will be left out of the largest economic buying power in this country. And so I think that's where you attracted me from the very beginning, because it was, hey, I'm the #1 at whatever I'm doing. I happen to be Latino.
Right.
And so that's a pretty big, important distinction
It
for me.
is. It's important.
But then timing is always interesting, because right when I had been elected, I then decided to start a software company and have my second child. So if for the people that weren't in the room, I think I'm the only NAHREP president who actually didn't show up to his own installation.
That's right.
Because
your son was born.
March 28th of 2014, my son was born. And if you remember, we were rehearsing the day before, and my son wasn't supposed to be born for 3 more weeks. And you said, I'll see you tomorrow. I said, unless Mateo shows up. And, and at 3 in the morning, he showed up. And but we made it work.
We zoomed you in from the hospital.
Yeah, holding my son. I recall exactly what you said. You're like, see what happens, the first millennial president I install, and he shows up digitally.
Yeah, that was really great. And it was important for us to have a leader like you because I loved the background that you had in tech and the fact that you were starting a startup in the tech space related to real estate, obviously. And I think that enhanced the way people looked at our organization. And hopefully it was good for you.
It was pivotal. Like I've always said, NAHREP is a huge chapter of my life that is not closed. It's a part of who I became in real estate and who I am. But the network you built actually accelerated and gave me the ability to go faster with my software. Right? When I showed up to a market, it was an instant connection and community I had with the NAHREP familia, and I could pick up the phone in any market, and if they were not sitting on the board, they knew somebody who was sitting on the board,
right.
And it gave instant edification, and people could vouch for me. So no, absolutely, and I think that NAHREP is like most things in life. I see folks that kind of show up to check the box, and I don't like box checkers, and I'm quite loud about it. But the folks who pour in because they want to and they care, I think they get so much more out of it, right? Like the concept of citizen lobbying was not something I was aware of until I met you, right? And you've put me in some of the most unique situations in my entire life. For the folks that never heard me speak, but during the financial crisis, there was more than one time where you called me and said, "Hey, I just got a last-minute invite to be somewhere in DC tomorrow, and I just can't physically get there fast enough. Can you go?" And I was in my 20s and intimidated, and I said, "Sure, but I don't want to say anything." And I called you from the front door of the White House at the Eisenhower offices. And I was in the room with 300 of the most powerful people on the planet deciding the future of the financial housing system, right? Like how it will continue to operate in the middle of the crisis. And at one point, the head of FHFA looks at me and goes, "What do the Latinos think?" I was texting you and you were responding. But again, I was never qualified for that. But it's those moments that have allowed me to level up, and I think that's the platform you've created. You've created a force multiplier for our people, which is amazing.
No, that's a great way to put it. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, one of the great pleasures and joys that I have as being the co-founder of the organization is seeing people like yourself sort of rise to the challenge, right? And that has actually happened more often than not. We put a lot of people, maybe not in quite that kind of position, but we put a lot of people in positions that they felt maybe they weren't quite ready for, either in terms of their experience level or just in terms of their presentation skills or whatnot. But more often than not, they rise to that challenge, and it's an incredible thing to see. And again, so talking about NAHREP for a little bit, that was a nice trip down memory lane.
I'll give you one more that I think is the opposite of what people experience. Like even when you would send us to our own representatives on the Hill and explain whatever was relevant that year. I think most people had an aha when they realized that the people making the rules actually don't know them.
Yep.
And they actually know more than them.
Yep.
And they were able to articulate how potential legislation affects their hometown. I think that was an empowering moment, right? Where, the example I just gave, I was out of my depth, but the flip side of it is a lot of times when we sent our people to their local representatives, they actually realized that the people about to sign the bills probably not well versed in them, and they had the opportunity to educate them.
I think that's a great point, and it's an interesting lesson in itself, because I've been in those situations as well, right? When we started NAHREP, I didn't know what I was doing. I was making it up as I went along, and I found myself in rooms that I felt I don't belong in this room. But there was one thing that I sort of told myself early on, and that is, I don't need to know everything, and I don't even need to know as much as whoever that counterparty may be. I just need to know what I know really well, and I need to be able to articulate that, because that's why I'm in that room in the first place. I'm not in that room to try to talk about how to save the whales or the world or anything like that. I'm there to talk specifically about what I am an expert in. And if that's housing or mortgage banking or any other sector, I think it's an important lesson. Be really good at what you're at. You don't need to know what everybody else knows. And you bring something to that table that's valuable.
100%. You got to just be good at a couple things.
Let's pivot for a little bit. And because I do want to talk a little bit about your experience with EXP and becoming the CEO of a publicly traded company, which is actually pretty amazing. But leadership is a passion of mine, or at least kind of studying it and breaking it down. And I believe that a lot of people deploy leadership in different ways. There isn't one way, I think, to be a great or effective leader. And I've seen different people do it different ways. I know, people that are really effective leaders who are just very committed to their own vision and are relentless in sort of articulating that vision and fighting for that vision. And there are other people that are better at collaboration. They're better at empowering others and therefore are effective leaders in that regard. And there's many other iterations of that. I'd love to hear a little bit about your personal philosophies around leadership. Obviously, you have been an effective leader. I've seen it firsthand through a number of different years, and now it's been personified in a pretty significant way as the CEO of a publicly traded company.
So first of all, I think leadership is a journey, and it's something that you have to be intentional about. I think in most structures in life, people become leaders completely accidentally. And a lot of times it's because they're a good doer. Like if you go back to the E-Myth, and then they get promoted to a manager, but never poured into like what skill set that requires. And just
because it's a different skill set.
100%. And again, like you said, you've studied it, and I feel like I've become a student of it. It's number one is communication, right? Clearly being able to articulate and unpack and listen with empathy. And for me, it's like if you're rude or overstep, it's also apologizing, right? And making sure that respect is earned both ways. But I talk about this a lot from stage, which is I think you need to become a student of yourself first, right? Really truly understand how your brain is wired, whether it's the DISC, the Myers-Briggs, AVA, whatever personality test you want to take.
I think that's interesting because we hear a lot about authenticity. And I think what you're saying is some sort of
100%
version of that, right?
So I know what my strengths are, but I'm also very aware of my weaknesses, right? So I'm not a micromanager. I'm not a detailed person. Most people think I am because of the way I speak and the things I've been able to accomplish, but it's because I've realized I'm not. So I build systems for that. And so knowing that I'm not going to be able to micromanage or keep track of details, I make sure that I have certain people around me with certain processes so I can do that, right? And again, I read and I've read a lot. And the single most important things humans look for to feel joy is completion and self-actualization. So in jobs, there's all kinds of data that shows, below a certain dollar amount, getting a raise creates happiness because you get from survival to stability. But in most MSAs, there is a indifference point where $10,000 doesn't create more joy, but what creates joy is the ability to make your own decisions, right? So that's why the Industrial Revolution was pretty bad on mental health, because people did the same thing over and over again and didn't accomplish anything. So for me, I've always looked to empower people where it's okay, this is the macro API, like KPI. I'm looking for 10% margin or this many units, and how you get there, as long as we both agree that that's an achievable goal, I let that person solve for it, and I think that creates a lot of autonomy. And when you, I think you both need to agree on the KPI, right? I think a form of leadership where I just dictate, hey, you need to hit X, and I didn't get any input from them, creates that's his goal versus our goal. And I think co-authoring, the decision tree, even, on a quarterly basis, I get together with our senior leadership team, and the agenda is whatever is the most important thing. it's a collaborative process where we get everyone to contribute, right? Because it's very different when this is our goal versus, you know, the guy in the ivory tower said that this is what we need to do, and then there's no buy-in from the beginning. So that's I've learned through my process that's probably the best way to get people to be rowing in the same direction, because they pick the destination with you.
So that's an interesting. So it's important to you that your team feels a sense of ownership around key decisions in particular, and so that takes time, and it takes collaboration, it takes trust. I know you're a voracious reader, and it reminds me a little bit of Steve Jobs, you know, the way he has led. Very charismatic leader, very, you know, visionary, you know, one of the best, if not the best ever, in terms of articulating that vision. But if you ask him what his greatest achievement or his greatest, the greatest thing he built at Apple, he says it's the team that he built, especially the team around him, the Tim Cooks and the Eddie Q's, and that team that ended up, you know, obviously creating the most valuable company in the world, which is a different way than other people tend to lead at times. But I like that way myself. I really am a big believer in being a good communicator, being the best in terms of that. But really, the real skill is getting people to both buy in and own those decisions, which means you have to collaborate, you have to listen to people as well, and then let those people do what they do best.
When I look through my journey, the leadership I enjoyed the most following allowed me to collaborate and gave me a voice, right? This is my first job, which is somewhat ironic, but you know, in other situations I've been in where I'm learning from people who knew stuff, it was the ones who asked me
Well,
questions.
let me interrupt you for a second. You just said this is your first job. Say that again. Explain that a little bit.
So I've been a founder CEO my entire life, right? So my previous W-2 before getting into real estate was Baskin Robbins in high school. So
No kidding.
yeah.
Wow. That's very interesting. And I think that's actually pretty rare. And I'd love to sort of explore how you think that all worked out, because real estate is a very interesting business, as we both know. Building an organization like NAHREP has been challenging, because I describe it as sort of the ultimate form of herding cats, right? I think that people get into the real estate business in the first place because they're sort of independent thinkers, they're nonconformists, they want to set their own schedules. Those are the things that attract them to the business. And of course, there's a good opportunity to earn a lot of money and make a great living as well. But then trying to get people who come from an unstructured sort of mindset and try to put them into a structured environment is very difficult. I think it's doable, but it's difficult. And I haven't seen many people make that transition and certainly not achieve the sort of level of success that you have in a very structured, very corporate environment. What do you basically attribute that to?
So
And do you share that?
No, absolutely. I mean, you know, as I was coming up in real estate, I feel like I became a pretty good real estate entrepreneur. But I did do a walkabout and somewhat leave our industry in the sense that I went into finance when I built a very large hard money business and had to raise capital from Wall Street.
Lending business.
Yeah. And so I had to learn this whole nother vernacular. And then as I was building that business, I decided to go start a software company. And in that process, I raised almost $48 million and got to pitch the smartest people on the planet. And when we did raise that money, I had a very real board with very sophisticated investors who taught me a whole nother language. And so I don't know that I could have gone from team leader to executive without that walkabout, because it taught me a whole nother language. It taught me a whole nother behavior pattern, consistency with board meetings and accountability and gross margin and EBITDA versus adjusted EBITDA and CapEx and all this stuff that's not part of our world in residential real estate. So,
but I also think that you are unique in the sense that you are I said earlier, a voracious reader. You are a lifetime learner, very disciplined in that regard. You speak with a great deal of knowledge, and I think that also had to play a tremendous role in it. So the leap from going from a realtor / team leader and then running a startup, basically creating a startup, and then running that startup. That's a big leap that I haven't seen happen very many times. It has happened, but not very many times. And usually the people who are able to make that transition are very astute. I mean, they become subject matter experts. They understand what you just described, how important it is to acquire these new skill sets and these new ways of thinking, and thinking in a more structured environment, and thinking in a way that you talk about the sophisticated investors that you had to deal with, and this board that you had to deal with. One of the things that I think attracted me to you very early on in terms of leadership is that I can see you in any room. I could see you in any room. I think about that.
You tested me. You tested me quite a few times.
I think about that, but yes, and that was a crazy time, right? I mean, you talk about the market being crazy right now. Go back to 2008, and things were changing every week in a profound way. But I could picture you being in a room with a CEO. I could picture you being in a room with a public policy official. And it's because I knew that you were a guy that prepared himself and just studied and was well-read.
Well, I mean, it's funny you say that, because I think that's such an unleveraged skill in today's world, right? So when I went to go pitch, Founders Fund and Excel and, the most marquee VCs on the planet, I actually just looked up their books and read them, right? Peter Thiel told you exactly how he likes to get pitched.
0 to 1.
Andreessen Horowitz told you exactly like you like to get pitched. In Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, he said if a founder showed up in a blazer, the meeting was over. Because if they weren't in hoodies and had a laptop in hand, they weren't real founders. And so I just put on a hoodie and my laptop was in my hand. So, there's so much knowledge out there. The amount of people that will actually get on the phone with me and actually not look up any of my background, right? And I'm sure it happens to you.
Yep.
So, I mean, success leaves clues, and the faster you can build rapport, the easier it is to build a relationship.
So let's go back and let's talk a little bit about EXP. And it's been a relatively short journey, because how long have you worked there?
It'll be 2 years next
2 years,
week.
yeah. I remember when you called me and let me know that you were going to be what was your position before?
I came in as the
Strategy?
president of the affiliated companies, because we have a portfolio companies.
That's right.
6 months later, I became the chief strategy officer.
Strategy officer, that's right. This is a little bit of a digression, but the whole issue of DE&I has become quite a polarizing issue recently. And I have my own thoughts about that. I write a blog, as you know, and I wrote a blog that basically was titled "The War on DEI is Actually a War on Capitalism." And it was taking a different sort of, I think, angle on the whole issue of DE&I, which I think has been completely convoluted. And, Elon Musk says that planes are going to start falling out of the sky because of DE&I. And Bill Ackerman wrote a manifesto on DE&I, blaming it for all of the world's problems, including the war in the Middle East. And so I think that things have gotten a little bit out of control in that regard, because both of them have basically characterized DE&I as been an effort to lower the bar and essentially put people who are not qualified into positions that are consequential, and that is going to have a terrible effect on our economy and other things, which in itself I don't disagree with. I think that if that's what DEI actually is, then it is not a good thing. And just bear with me a little bit as I kind of tell this story. I remember when my son was being recruited as a basketball player, because he ended up playing college basketball, and he was being recruited by a couple of high academic schools. One of them was the University of Chicago. And I remember the coach, and as you know, University of Chicago has like a 5% admission rate. Very tough to get into. One of the toughest in the country. And they have a pretty good basketball team. And the coach talked to the players that were there for the same trip and the parents. And he explained, he says, every year, University of Chicago gets roughly 40,000 applications. Of those 40,000 applications, he says, roughly 28,000 are from students who are qualified to do the work here in the University of Chicago. We have to narrow that down to 2,000, basically, approvals. He says, if you're in that 28,000 academically, I can get you into that 2,000 if we recruit you for basketball. But if you're not in that 28,000, I can't get you in. Which I thought was a very clear way of articulating that. What he was basically saying is that we're not going to lower the bar for you. You have to be qualified to do the work here. But if you also can do the work and are a good basketball player, then that combination can get you admission here. And I think that that is the way DE&I was supposed to be deployed. We weren't supposed to put unqualified people into positions that they couldn't do. We were going to expand the pool of qualified applicants by reducing barriers, artificial barriers, that have historically prevented certain communities from being able to kind of enter that pool. And that in itself was going to provide us with a larger qualified pool of applicants that we can use to help build our company.
I think the beauty of having a diverse group of folks is the different vantage points they bring, right?
Diversity of thought.
Absolutely. Diversity of thought, of
Experiences.
upbringing, experience, point of view. Like, I'm not only Latino because my parents are Latino. I grew up in South America. I didn't get here till I was 12 years old. You know, I did kidnapping drills. They tried to kidnap me twice in Colombia as a kid. Like, you know, Narcos was a documentary of the 90s in Colombia, not just a series. So when you have that diversity of background, I think it brings different point of views. In a world that changes so rapidly, there's things that can't be taught, right? So for agents who live in a rapidly growing Latino demographic, who are in their mid-50s, mid-60s, they'll come to me and say, I don't speak Spanish. And I said, you're probably not going to learn it. But what you can do is you can hire a 26-year-old Latino or Latina who is hungry and wants to learn how to become you. Teach them how to become a business person, and they can handle that demographic that's exploding in your market. And I think that's a better example of it, right? You get to leverage each other's gifts and experiences. And so when a leadership team is monolithic in any form, gender or ethnicity, you are missing that point of view from somebody else's experience that you just don't know what you don't know, right? There are experiences I just haven't had, and that to me is the beauty of having a different group of people who can say, hey, to you that might not mean this, but to me it does. Or, hey, we're completely forgetting this audience with this story because they won't identify with it. And that's to me the strength that a diverse group of people bring together.
That's very well said, and I think encapsulates the idea of DE&I, at least the way it should have been deployed from the get-go. And I think it doesn't hurt also. The Latino marketplace is driving growth in our industry, probably in every geography now.
Exactly.
So that wind, I think, makes things a little bit easier to make that case. So now's a great time, and now's a really great time to have a Latino CEO running the biggest company in our industry, which is great. So tell us a little bit about your plans from a professional standpoint.
So first of all, we're going into uncharted waters, right? The rules will change.
Major changes in the real estate industry.
So my number one thing is to make sure that we support our agents through a pretty major transition, and very tactically, right? There's been a lack of voice from senior
But what does that mean, support our agents? Break it down for me.
Absolutely. So in every jurisdiction, we need to be prepared to provide new forms. You know, if there's going to be new ways of billing customers, flat fee, percentage, hourly, right? We have to actually very tactically have the tech and the, just as basic as the having a one-page document versus an 8-page document that is for one property versus exclusive, right? So very tactically being able to, at the end of the day, we're a real estate brokerage, right? Even though we're very tech leaning, you know, making sure we have all the educational products. So I'm going to be going around the country and teaching, whether it's in person or virtually, this is how you handle these objections. This is how you get to a signature so you're compliant with the new rules. So I always kind of break down the very tactical, and the new rule changes have new procedural things that people aren't used to doing, right? So if you need to get a form signed prior to showing a house, here is the 8-page presentation I would use. This is how I would articulate the value proposition. I'm coaching agents on, hey, go and interview the last 2 years of buyers you put in homes and ask them what they liked about the home buying process with you. So you can then ask for reviews explaining the value proposition you deliver to that consumer segment that you didn't previously focus on. So I would say in the immediate future, it's making sure that they're supported and ready for the transition. And then always maintaining our leadership status in the industry. Glenn Sanford created a category, and we're arguably the category king. There's now like 23 copycats, meaning it worked, because that's
Sure.
the only growth segment is in the cloud-based brokerages right now. But we also got to remember the moment in the market we're in, and that's, one of my favorite words in the English language is context, right? I keep telling agents, we just survived the worst year in housing in 25 years. And 2024 is going to be just like it, unfortunately, if you go year-over-year data. So I'm constantly reminding agents, it's like this too shall pass, right? You and I've lived through several market cycles. And right now, in most markets, surviving is winning, right? The fact you're still in the business, because we are losing agents throughout the entire country as an industry. And so
How do you feel about that, losing agents?
But losing agents is cyclical. Membership count is tied to transactional volume. If we go over our functional real estate careers, the low point in transaction units was in 2023, again 2024, and the previous one was 08, 09, and 10. The previous high point was 2021 and then 2006, where we peaked at 7 million. And it's the crux of the NAR settlement of the DOJ. They think it's going to reduce cost of home ownership, and I think that's a flat-out misconception. Housing prices.
I don't mean to laugh, but I also think it's crazy that they think that.
Yeah, housing prices and transaction volume is a math problem between household formation, which creates demand, number of homes available for sale, and then the last one is affordability, right? Because I think residential real estate is more basic than people give it credit for. It is a human condition that is almost predictable. We fall in love, we make little people, we need more space, we need less space. Death, divorce, and a couple promotions along the way dictate every move you've ever made and I've ever made. No one wakes up in the morning and says it's 2.8% rates today. Today's a good day to buy a condo. You say, honey, we need more room. The kids moved out and we need less room. Or unfortunately somebody passes, or there's a disillusionment of the partnership, right? That's why people move. And so there is a bottom line amount of transactions that happen if rates are 20%, right? Because people have human condition needs. I think human beings decide they need to move based on human condition, and then, survey the market and decide to either buy or rent based on what they can afford, right? So I think what the population you and I both serve do a very noble thing and handhold consumers through a super expensive, highly litigious, highly complex, thing that only happens twice, 3 times in their entire life. And the ones that do that expertly will always have a role. I think if technology could have cut the real estate professional out, it would have happened in the last 10 years.
Absolutely.
With the tens of billions of dollars that were deployed into this space. And if we look back at all the disruptors, they all eventually pivoted to becoming brokerages, right? Who just couldn't do it without the boots on the ground, local experts.
And you're talking about companies that came in to disrupt the industry and displace realtors now have basically
either fully pivoted and become a brokerage,
right,
or fully partnered with brokerages for either acquisition or disposition of properties, right? Because that's the coolest part about being involved with your organization. I got to meet these grassroots advocates, right? Not just entrepreneurs, but advocates in their community. The really good real estate professional is that true center of influence for your taxes, your legal recommendation, your contractor recommendation.
Totally true. I mean, that's actually I think the thrust behind the NAHREP 10 principles is recognizing that these people are more than just facilitators of real estate transactions. They are truly guides, trusted advisors, whatever you want to call them, for a whole gambit of economic transactions that people in their community undertake.
100%.
And so that role is not going to go away easily.
I don't think it goes away, right? Because people like to compare us to like the airline industry, but again, an airline ticket is a highly commoditized
transactional
thing, right? You know, there's some people that buy lots of houses in their life, but on average, it's 2 to 3 times. You stay in it 9 years, you rent the first 3 times, you buy the last 3 times, statistically speaking.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't think that's going to change. So that's really terrific. Your role at EXP is going to be significant because you guys are a market leader, and market leaders always are looked to by the industry for basically an indication of where the market is going. So that's an important responsibility that I'm sure you feel. You guys are also going global. So what you describe is only happening here in the United States for all intents and purposes. Other parts of the world have different issues and have different business models. And you guys are obviously expanding your presence in those markets. Do you see the real estate business becoming a global business? Is it becoming, I mean, I know it is to a certain extent already, but there's still, I think, pretty significant barriers between one country to another.
So I think, you know, as we become a more digitally connected world, and depending on the market, like we're sitting in my hometown of Miami, this is a super global market. So we have a very large team here who sells a lot of pre-construction. And most of their sales come from whatever countries are having economic instability that year, right? And the folks are trying to, you know, find a safe haven in dollars, and U.S. real estate tends to be a really good one. And so I'm very well versed in how different real estate is in other countries. And for, you know, all the accusations in the NAR and DOJ settlement, well, they'll point out other countries have lower rates, but it's highly inefficient compared to us. You know, our form of organized real estate in North America has given us the most liquid, transparent, and accurate market in the world, in my opinion. Right? When I look up a property in an MLS or one of our portals, if it says active, there's a written definition of whatever active is. If it says 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, I know that the definition of a bedroom has a door, a closet, and a windowsill 44 inches from the ground with a 60-foot egress. Right? If you're in a different country that doesn't have regulations, you know, it could say a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. You get there, and it's a closet. Right? So there's just so many things I think we take for granted, right?
Yes.
And going back to my perspective, I grew up in countries where freedom and economic stability are not taken for granted on a day-to-day basis. And the drills I did with the embassy was a coup scenario, and we had to get airlifted out. Versus here, we just take so much for granted.
Very interesting point. Great way, I think, to kind of wrap things up here. It's been a great conversation, Leo. Great to see you. I know that we're going to be in close communication as you sort of continue to navigate through this position and become, if not the, certainly one of the most recognized leaders in our industry. So
Great to see you,
congratulations, brother.